The governor's motion to Judge Gordon asked that he issue an order requiring the justices to recuse themselves from a Senate-requested opinion. The governor argued that the 6 justices of the Supreme Court appeared to be in a conflict of interest by answering an opinion for the Senate while the Senate controls a judicial pay raise issue. But Judge Gordon threw the governor's complaint out. In his written opinion, Gordon essentially said the Senate had no one else to answer their question for them. Had the justices excused themselves, as the governor requested, then the only recourse would have been for the governor to appoint a new judicial body to hear the Senate's question. But at that point, the appointed body would have the apparent conflict of interest in that they were appointed by the governor. But the governor hasn't given up. He's filed yet another complaint in circuit court that would render the Supreme Court's opinion null and void, again based on the premise of a conflict of interest between the justices and the Senate's pay raise issue. That complaint wound up in the hands of Judge Joseph Phelps, who hasn't set a hearing date as of yet. All of this started when the Senate asked the Supreme Court for an opinion about the effect of the governor's 4-day Easter weekend vacation and the bills that the Senate tried to deliver during that time. Among those bills is the current use property tax measure. While the governor has lost several rounds in the courts, his day with investment bankers in New York has reportedly been very good. Bids were taken today on the sale of $520 million in tax-free bonds. Bond attorneys say that Alabama's investment plan has been dominating the money market, encouraging a number of other states to postpone their bond sales until later. Governor James is now meeting with the Bond Commission for the Oil Windfall Investment Plan. That bond commission will decide if the bids taken today are encouraging enough to proceed with the bond sale itself. The next step will be for the investment of the actual $460 million in oil windfall money. That will occur in the next several days. Then the bonds will be sold within several weeks. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol. Governor James returned from New York late this afternoon. He was in New York for the price bidding on how much interest the state would have to pay when it sells $520 million in tax-free bonds. Bond attorneys and the governor say the market was very good today, with bids this morning just above 11.5% and this evening just below that figure. Last week, the interest could have been as high as 12.5%. Tonight, the Bond Commission, made up of the governor, Finance Director Rex Rayner, and State Treasurer Annie Laurie Gunner, told the New York bond agents to go ahead with the sale.
Lane?
Yes, Governor.
You got a deal.
All right, done.
Governor, thank you all very much.
Thank you much. We're going to get on to the management team right now and confirm it out.
You did an excellent job. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
The sale of the bonds is expected near the 1st of May. The money from those bonds will fund the massive road, bridge, and building construction program that's a part of the governor's plan using the money from oil leases in the Gulf of Mexico. Between now and the 1st of May, the $460 million that came in from the oil leases will be invested in government-secured purchases. That's expected tomorrow morning. The governor says the time for getting this plan into action is just right. The money market has leveled to good rates, and the cost of those proposed projects, he says, is running cheaper than expected. While the governor had a good day with his investment plan, he also had a rough day in court. This morning, Montgomery County Circuit Court Judge William Gordon turned down the governor's request to have 6 members of the state Supreme Court disqualify themselves in an opinion they issued for the Senate. The governor's attorneys argued the Supreme Court members could have been influenced in their opinion by a Senate-controlled pay raise for judges. The Senate had asked for the opinion when Governor James took his unannounced 4-day Easter weekend vacation. But in his ruling, Judge Gordon essentially said if the Supreme Court members had excused themselves, there wouldn't have been another court for the Senate to go to, which would have put the question right back before the Supreme Court. But the governor hasn't given up. He's filed another suit that asks to have the opinion declared null and void because of the alleged conflict of interest. A hearing on that complaint hasn't been set yet. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
Individuals and groups from around the city came forward during the public hearing suggesting to the council what they think should be done with the money from the Federal Office of Housing and Urban Development. Several people appeared asking for a playground in the South Lawn area. They say there are no good places for children to play in or around South Lawn, and they need help from the city. Another request for a park, this time for the Sheraton Heights area, came from County Commissioner John Knight. He also requested HUD funds to help renovate 82 public housing units in the city, which he says need painting and general repairs to make them livable. Many of the requests for HUD money dealt with drainage problems in the city. That prompted Councilman Joe Reed to ask if the city has some sort of comprehensive plan for dealing with drainage problems, rather than what he called a hopscotch approach. Mayor Emery Falmer says a comprehensive plan does exist, but council politics very often interfere with implementation of the plan. The public hearing on the HUD money was the third one in the past year and lasted about an hour and a half. At the end, the council voted to table the issue for 1 week. Council Chairman Willie Peake explained that will give the council time to consider the suggestions heard this evening and compare them with plans submitted by the mayor and the Citizens Participation Group, which conducted the first two hearings. The council also carried over consideration of two resolutions dealing with tougher sentences for criminals who commit crimes with handguns and other weapons. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
The helicopter came in and we saw it when it touched down. It touched down, seemed like good. It made a touchdown, then it went straight back up for a few feet, and then it came back down nose and just exploded. And just a big old cloud of dust come up, and didn't see any fire, any smoke, or anything. It just exploded and dust went everywhere. And we ran onto the fence over here and watched and for a while. And they was three of them that was trapped inside of the aircraft. I guess they were just got the total impact of the explosion, but one of them was thrown free because they went to work with him right off, and he was alive, but then I understand he died before they got him to Fort Rucker Hospital.
If you're like most, you may forget your anniversary date, your wife's birthday, but Americans usually remember midnight, April 15th. That's the deadline for filing federal tax returns. With that deadline less than 6 hours away, many Montgomery area taxpayers were busy buying stamps and mailing the forms to beat the 12 strikes of midnight. Those who can't meet the deadline can ask for a 60-day extension by filing Form 4868. However, the form must be filed before tonight's deadline, and if money is owed the government, a check must be included. But you can only ask for the extension if you plan to file the long Form 1040. According to government figures, the people that wait until the last minute more than likely owe the government money. They say those who file early returns would like to get their refunds. If you're waiting until midnight tonight, you will have some help, but only at one post office branch in Montgomery. That's here at the Capitol Plaza Annex. Postal officials say the Capitol Plaza Annex will stay open and employees will be on hand tonight to weigh the parcels for proper postage. The downtown post office will empty all boxes at midnight, so tax returns placed in them will be postmarked before the deadline. The self-service stations will be open for those who want to weigh their own mail. The Internal Revenue Service says that in a typical year, it receives 20 to 22 million personal returns on April 13th, 14th, and 15th. Mac Carmack, WSFA TV News.
Commissioners say negative feedback from the public is 90% responsible for their bailing out of negotiations with Alabama Power. They say the plan, which called for small periodic rate increases, has merit, but for now it's dead.
Those discussions have led to some embracement of the concept, but as to this date, there is no agreement between the Commission and the power company. There's no agreement between the power company and any of the intervenors, and no agreement between the Commission and any of the intervenors.
Since negotiations have ended for the time being, the PSC must now turn its attention to the utilities rate hike request of $454 million. The Commission suspended the effective date for the rate request until October 16th. That amount would have automatically taken effect tomorrow if the Commission hadn't suspended it. Commissioners say they hope to reach an agreement by the end of the summer or early fall. The last rate hike request by Alabama Power was turned down, and Camp says if the utility gets any increase this time around, they'll have to prove beyond any doubts they really need it. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Uncle Sam.
The plan for periodic rate increases would have given the power company a guaranteed rate of return through 1984. But commissioners say none of the parties could agree on the plan.
It's highly misunderstood by the general public. We looked at it as a means of possibly trying to levelize rates in the future. Thought this would help the ratepayer. Still think it would. I'm willing to look at any other plan that anybody has or wants to suggest that we look at that would help the ratepayer and help levelize rates and stop the large, tremendous increases that we've had in the past.
And now the Commission will begin rate hearings just like old times. The total amount before them is $454 million. $325 million of that is from an earlier request that commissioners turned down. The Supreme Court is hearing arguments on that case and has already granted an increase of 14.5% of the $325 million until they make a decision. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
The jury is trying to decide if excessive or unnecessary force was used on former inmate Cofield on October 16, 1980. Cofield, who represented himself, testified in his own defense today. He claims prison officer Guy Willis put his hands around Cofield's neck and physically choked him. Cofield said, while demonstrating the alleged incident, that Willis exclaimed, "Are you going to go to the back gate? Are you going to go to the back gate?" Cofield said Officer George McCree, who allegedly assisted in the assault, told Willis, "Hey man, what are you doing? You better let go." Officer Robert Conway is the other officer who allegedly aided in the attack. All three officers testified they used minimum force to restrain Cofield, who they say refused to go to work detail. They denied the former inmate was choked. The officer said Cofield cursed them and swung at them. Cofield is seeking $150 million in punitive and compensatory damages. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the Federal Courthouse.
Captain James Foster of the Selma Police Department says 22-year-old Deborah Ann Jones was babysitting her 5-year-old nephew, Scott Brady Jones, yesterday afternoon at the time of the murder. Captain Foster says the boy's mother, Helen Darlene Nichols, found both bodies at her home.
The child died by drowning. The young lady died by strangulation. Manual strangulation, I believe, is the way the toxicologist stated. And that's all we've heard so far.
Captain Foster says Miss Jones was also stabbed in the lower part of her back and was only partially clothed. He said they are not sure if she was sexually assaulted.
The state toxicologist is conducting an autopsy on both victims. It will take a month before police get a written copy of the final report. Selma police say they have no leads at this point, but the investigation continues. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News in Selma.
Saturday will mark the 24th time Bear Bryant has overlooked the annual Spring A-Day game in Tuscaloosa. It's been a spring so far in which Bryant has not been overly pleased. Despite the fact that Bama returns no less than 17 starters, Bryant has growled about the ineffectiveness of both his offensive and defensive lines in particular. Most of the problems, he says, have been caused by an unusual amount of spring injuries.
Although we tried to work in small groups and tried to get them one injured, we have a list of about 32 that they're not able to practice, and hopefully we'll get them, most of them, back sometime. And because I would like to see them together, best against the best sometime or another. But so far we just haven't been able to do that.
Saturday, spectators in Tuscaloosa should be in for an offensive show. It's been no secret that Bryant has been working on improving his passing game this spring, and that involves getting the ball to fleet wide receivers Jesse Bendros and Joey Jones. Does this mean dropping the wishbone? Bryant says no, but he adds as much as 40% of Bama's offense this fall will be something other than the wishbone. Defensively, Bryant is looking for replacements at middle guard, linebacker, and defensive back. Prospects are good at all three. Bryant adds his defensive secondary could be one of his best ever. Rosters for the 8A game were divided yesterday. Free safety Tommy Wilcox and halfback Jeff Fagan will captain the Whites. Offensive tackle Joe Beasley and cornerback Jeremiah Castile lead the Reds. Kickoff at Bryant-Denny Stadium Saturday afternoon is set for 3 o'clock. Reporting from Tuscaloosa, Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
Well, you know, when we first came here, it seemed that the majority of the pitching staff had ideas about pitching everybody inside and going away. But the way I feel that you get guys outside and you have to come in so you can get them outside. I think their philosophy was just a little bit backwards.
Have they surprised themselves at all? Have you seen them talking about it and they're kind of getting turned on by what's happening?
No, not really. Most of the guys have pretty good confidence in themselves. They're major league pitchers. They wouldn't be here. And even though they had a bad year last year, I think that it was probably because they were doing things just a little backwards.
Early this morning, the Heritage Trust Fund Board of Trustees, which is charged with investing the $468 million in windfall oil lease revenues, made the decision on what securities the state should buy. Groups of 4 different investments were made that will net the state an average of 14.65% interest over the next 20 years. The size of the interest is important since the state obligated yesterday to sell tax-free bonds paying 11.45%. Just more than the 3% spread is the key to the state being able to invest on the one hand and borrow on the other and still make a profit and never lose the original $468 million. It'll take several days for all of the investments to be sealed and about 2 weeks for the bonds to be sold, locking in the beginning of a massive road, bridge, and building construction program. With that settled, the governor turned to his other problems, namely his opposition to the current use property tax measure and his battle with the Supreme Court. The governor revealed his proposed amendment to the current use bill, an amendment the governor says wipes out any objections that large landowners will benefit more from the tax break than small farmers. But the governor hasn't turned his amendment into the House and Senate, despite the possibility it could become law automatically without the changes. The governor contends his 4-day Easter vacation gives him until Monday to act, but the Supreme Court told the Senate last week that, in their opinion, the governor had to act by today. Meanwhile, the governor says he still intends to have the Supreme Court's involvement in the issuing of the opinion investigated by the Judicial Inquiry Commission because of the alleged conflict of interest over the judicial pay raise bill that's now in the Senate's control. The House spent much of its day debating whether to return Monday or Tuesday. Alabama Education Association-backed members fought for Monday, saying any bills passed Tuesday, including the budgets, could be killed by the governor. Jimmy Holly and Roy Johnson weren't able to convince members committed to the 16% teacher pay raise to overcome the House leadership's push for a Tuesday meeting. Downstairs, Secretary of State Don Siegelman said he was faced with a legal question over a House resolution recalling Governor James' budget isolation constitutional amendment. Siegelman says the governor demands the right to act on the resolution, presumably to veto it, but the resolution denies the governor that right. Siegelman says that conflict, along with some other technical problems, prompted him to ask the governor and the legislature to submit arguments to him so he could decide whether to allow the legislature to recall the budget isolation proposal or to allow the governor the apparent option of trying to preserve the voters' right to decide. In all of this activity, 2 bills did become law, one allowing equal strikes of potential jurors by the prosecution and the defense, the other exempting church schools from state control. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol. The nearly $500 million investment was made by the Heritage Trust Fund Board of Trustees and used the money the state was paid last year by oil companies wanting the right to drill for oil off the Mobile coast. The investment is part of the governor's plan to buy secured investments that will provide enough income to pay off a $520 million bond issue. The money borrowed through the bond issue will then be used for a massive construction program. This morning's investments were described as better than expected. The investments will earn an average interest of just more than 14.5%, more than 3% more than the interest the state will have to pay those who loan money to the state in the bond issue. The legislature met today, in part waiting for Governor James' action on the current use property tax measure. The governor's amendments were never submitted, raising the question, has the current use bill become law automatically or not? The governor still contends his 4-day Easter weekend postponed his deadline until next Monday, but the Supreme Court last week told the Senate it thought today would be the deadline. The governor revealed his proposed amendment, which he says is designed to specifically give small farmers a tax break and not large private or corporate landowners. Another issue raised today came from Secretary of State Don Siegelman. The issue? Will Governor James' proposed budget isolation constitutional amendment ever make it to the voters? Siegelman says a resolution by the legislature stopping the referendum and recalling the amendment has some apparent technical problems. He says he'll let the governor and the legislature submit legal arguments and then decide next week. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
The jury had several questions for Judge Truman Hobbs before finally reaching a decision. They were trying to decide if excessive force was used on former inmate Cofield on October 16, 1980, and whether Cofield was denied medical treatment for a foot ailment that same day. Cofield claims Officer Willis strangled and choked him, while Officers Conway and McCree held his arms and legs. The three officers took the stand and denied Cofield was choked, but admitted they used a minimum amount of force to restrain him while he was being escorted to a work detail they say Cofield had refused to go. Willis claimed he grabbed Cofield around the neck area. But a former prison officer, William Benton, testified that he saw the alleged incident. Benton says he saw the three officers scuffling with Cofield. Benton says, quote, "It didn't take three people to do what they did." Medical reports in the case the day after the alleged incident showed questionable bruises and a tender right area on the right side of Cofield's chest. A prison nurse testified Cofield appeared to be hoarse during his medical visit, but an investigation by the Department of Corrections concluded no evidence of brutality was found. Two Draper inmates who say they saw the alleged incident took the stand. Larry Barnett said he heard Cofield gagging, and William Trawick said he was told by another officer if he did not turn around, he'd get, quote, a taste of it. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the Federal Courthouse.
The child died by drowning. The young lady died by strangulation, manual strangulation, I believe is the way the toxicologist stated.
A win tonight would have helped the Hawks' chances for the home court advantage for next week's mini-series. And they started off hot. Dan Roundfield with 7 first-quarter points, scores here on a good move. He converted the foul, and Atlanta leads by 8 early. But Indiana fought back with the help of poor Atlanta shooting and foul trouble. Butch Carter with 14 points in the quarter. His bomb here from the corner tied it at 43-all. George McGinnis gave the Pacers a 7-point halftime lead with this drive and a stuff. In the third, Indiana increased their lead to as much as 11. Johnny Davis on the drive converts a three-point play, 74-63 Indiana. In the fourth, Atlanta tries to fight back. John Drew, the high point man on the night with 21, scores here with a nice assist from Wes Matthews. But the Hawks get no closer than 4. The final, Indiana 108, Atlanta 102. Home court advantage in the mini-series looking bleak for the Hawks. Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
Hundreds of Montgomeryans have been going to different post offices throughout the city today trying to beat the midnight deadline and get their income taxes in. Tonight is no exception at the Capitol Plaza Post Office. It's the only one in town that's open, and there are officials standing by ready to stamp those envelopes when they come in. Representatives from the IRS predict that most of the people that are here tonight are those who owe the government money. They predict they'll get at least $300 billion in income tax returns this year. Now, here at Capitol Plaza, it's raining a little bit, so you might want to bring an umbrella or something to keep you dry. If you miss tonight's deadline, you'll face a penalty. The government will charge you up to 5% for the total amount of income tax that you owe for each month that your return is late. And if you don't file at all, you could face up to a year in prison and $10,000. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
This confirms what we've been saying all along, and that is that once you create a climate in a country where you have a disregard for the life of the unborn, as evidenced by the millions of abortions that are now being performed in America every year, then it's only a short step from that position to a position where you have a disregard for the life of the born, as we have in this case.
We use the reasoning that's been used. We have a counseling pregnancy service whereby we
under roof here.
And I saw a film and took some it gets pretty hectic. There's a lot of activity. Of course, there's a lot of activity throughout the year, but it gets much worse and much more fast-paced as we approach April 15th, and especially right after April 15th. It's probably worse for us a few days after the 15th than it is just before. We will receive probably 2.5 million pieces of mail this particular week. There have been weeks when we've gotten over 3 million pieces of mail, depending upon how April 15th falls. And we spend a lot of time and a lot of effort to keep that mail organized and to get it speeded on its way. We have to sort it, we have to extract it, we have to deposit the checks very quickly, and then begin the process of posting the returns and issuing the refund checks.
Doyle says the governor is trying to do everything he can to kill the current use bill, a bill that requires property to be taxed at its current use rather than how it might be used in the future.
The bill is not designed for large landowners, but equally benefits small farmers and large owners, as we believe is required under the Constitution. Many of the farmers of this state are going bankrupt. You can't say it much plainer than that. We know the farmers of Alabama need this legislation. And furthermore, we are convinced that the general public wants to help our farmers stay in business. We all pay the price if that family farm goes under. But the governor has turned his back on agriculture, like no other governor in the history of our state.
Doyle admits that the bill would reduce the amount of money public school systems would receive in the future, but says that amount would be a slight reduction in the overall increase. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News. A number of opponents of the current use bill, including Governor James, say the bill would reduce the total amount of taxes that go to public schools. Dorrell says the bill would mean only a slight reduction in the total amount that taxes would increase, not a reduction in existing tax revenue.
Current use, according to his own figures, will reduce that totally about $18 million. Now, we don't agree with that, neither does the legislative fiscal officer. He says about $13 million. So take either figure you want to. Take the highest, which is the Revenue Department, which is figured with inflated values and deflated values on the increase. But be that as it may, in either case, we're going to have about a $115 million increase on taxes on the people around on the property owners of Alabama this year.
Dorrell says Alabama farmers need the bill since many are going bankrupt. He says he's convinced that the general public wants to help the farmers stay in business because he says we'll all pay the price if the family farm goes under. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
The ceremonies were a lavish affair, complete with military band and a host of civilian and military dignitaries. Congressman Dickinson, the ranking Republican of the House Armed Services Committee, is the fourth winner of the award that recognizes an American who's been most effective in keeping the American public aware of the needs of defense preparedness. Previous winners were Senator John Stennis in 1979, Bob Hope in 1980, and Governor William Clements of Texas in 1981. At the banquet, Dickinson was presented with a gold medal and $10,000. After receiving the award, Dickinson talked at length about American high technology finding its way to communist governments. He says we must close the door to technology thefts, but he says it's not going to be easy.
An erosion of American technology that has allowed our potential enemies and adversaries to leapfrog generations ahead of what they were capable of doing, to the point now where they, in many instances, not only match us, but have accelerated and gone past us. It's something that we must all work together. None of us can do it alone. I hope we work together. Thank you very much.
The American Defense Preparedness Association is a nonprofit educational association dedicated to national security through industrial preparedness. Mac Carmack, WSFA TV News.
Emory farmer Billy Joe Camp and Annie Laurie Gunter, all well known in the state of Alabama, all with long track records. The most important thing they all emphasize to the Women's Club members is involvement. Montgomery Mayor Emory Farmer says he believes everyone has a duty to serve, and the best quality of a leader is his character. Farmer says all public servants should be honest and stand for what's right. Public Service Commission President Billy Joe Camp echoed some of Farmer's words, saying the public should always demand complete candor on the part of candidates, because he says many times they tell only part of the story. Both men say they may be candidates in the next election, Farmer for governor and Camp for lieutenant governor. But State Treasurer Annie Laurie Gunter makes no bones about her candidacy. She says she's the best treasurer the state has ever had, and she plans to run for office again. She says she'd like to see more women involved in government, especially the legislature. She says too much back-scratching goes on up there, and she says a woman can smell a rat easier than a man. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
And because you care and want to be involved, very briefly, let us expose some.
That if men and women of capacity refuse to take part in their government, that we indeed condemn ourselves, our children, our friends, our families, our loved ones to being governed under the wrong kind of government.
You know, oftentimes you get told part of the story, but not all of the story. And I guess those of us that travel about have always been reminded of little jokes or stories. And of course, I came here to be reminded of this one.
I think that the women of this country have a grave responsibility in trying to turn around the trends in this country, the lack of moral values that we have. I think it's time for parents and grandparents to stop letting the television raise their children and to take a real...
The governor took his proposal today to the news media in Birmingham, Huntsville, and Mobile. He continued his attack on the property tax measure being pushed by Farm Bureau, saying it sets an artificially low agricultural property value using a complicated formula based on crop prices and interest rates. Governor James says his plan bases agricultural property values on the average value of farm and timberland in the 34 least populated counties in the state. He says this eliminates any arbitrary values and any problems of farmland near urban or industrial areas from being overtaxed.
And that is the only true way to put a true value on property.
And the governor says his plan offers a so-called farmstead exemption that further discounts tax rates by 40%. But the governor's plan may be too late. The Supreme Court's opinion last week suggested the governor ran out of time to offer his amendment yesterday. But the governor told the media in Huntsville that he'll fight that with every available resource. The last-minute roadshow has been to take the governor's compromised current use proposal to the media across the state. But the real negotiations occurred yesterday when the governor met with a group of legislators who are potential swing votes. They might switch over and support his compromise. The governor will spend the weekend in Gulf Shores, resting up for next week when that showdown could occur. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News in Mobile.
Stan Cottrell holds the record for running all the way across the United States. He made the 3,100-mile trip from New York to San Francisco in 48 days, breaking the old mark by 5 days. He's now using his talent to promote the Muscular Injury and Skeletal Disease Foundation. With a sponsorship from the A.L. Williams Insurance Company of Atlanta, Cottrell began the trip from the Georgia capital to Mobile this past Tuesday. This afternoon, he reached the halfway point, the steps of the Capitol here in Montgomery. He told me the run actually serves several purposes.
Very briefly. First of all, I need to do this type of running for an upcoming run this summer, which will take me some 4,000 miles in China, so I need to put in multiple days of over 30-plus miles a day. The second reason is it's for a very good cause, the Muscular Injuries and Skeletal Disease Foundation, and tie that in with my sponsor, A.L. Williams, so there's three good reasons why.
After receiving a proclamation from Governor James, it was off to Mobile. After numerous promotional stops, Cottrell hopes to reach the port city by next Friday. And from there, it's on to China for the 4,100-mile trip along the Great Wall. Reporting from the Capitol, Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
I'm right skeptical. I understand that the Argentine government is in a real situation down there. There's 150% inflation. The economic problems are great, and most people think it was a calculated move to take the spotlight off of their economic problems and give them a great spirit of nationalism by taking them, and therefore the present regime at the end wouldn't be losing out. So if they withdraw, they'd have to do it in good graces, and from what I've seen thus far, there hadn't been any proposals of real good graceful withdrawal.
About a month ago in Montgomery, and I checked with some people in the housing business on the permits for new houses, which would indicate for new starts. I was told that in December of last year, which was December
Caulfield now faces a second-degree theft of property charge, reportedly involving the purchase of goods at 2 Kmart stores in Huntsville. Authorities say he paid for them with worthless checks drawn on a newly opened bank account. Today, Caulfield voluntarily turned over 2 expired gasoline credit cards to the district attorney's office. He reportedly used one to purchase gasoline while in Montgomery for the trial. But Caulfield claims there was a misunderstanding with bank officials concerning his new account. Caulfield says right now he's not overly worried about the charge.
The warrant of arrest doesn't bother me. The person is innocent until proven guilty, so the warrant of arrest doesn't bother me.
But Caulfield may not be able to enjoy the $740 he was awarded. The state has asked Judge Truman Hobbs to change the jury's verdict. Judge Hobbs has taken the request under advisement. Today, federal officers say Caulfield did not appear to be surprised when they took him into custody. When I talked to him about the charge, he didn't appear to be surprised about that either. Caulfield says he's confident the case will be dismissed. In the meantime, he returns to prison in Huntsville, facing another possible prison sentence. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News. The jury was trying to decide if excessive force was used on former inmate Caulfield back on October 16, 1980, and whether Caulfield was denied medical treatment for a foot ailment that same day. The jury found Officer Willis guilty of choking Caulfield, but had to have the medical question separated from the verdict before finally reaching a decision. During the trial, Caulfield claimed Officer Willis nearly strangled him, while Officers Conway and McCree held him down. 3 officers took the stand and denied Caulfield was choked, but they admit they wrestled Caulfield to the ground after he refused to go on a work detail. The officers say Caulfield swung at them and missed, then ripped off his shirt when they let him up. Caulfield was in the courtroom when the jury's decision was read today, but was already in federal custody at the time. He was arrested for a second-degree theft of property charge, reportedly in connection with buying goods with worthless checks in Huntsville. He's being returned to Madison County to face those charges. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
Directly into the system, and I believe they'll find that to be easier, more convenient, and I think that we dial 0, then the number, then we'll get a tone, and you simply dial in your calling card number.
Thank you.
The automated voice says thank you, and the call's on its way.
competition is fast and furious with man and machine trying to beat the clock. The sport is professional chainsaw cutting. The men competing, both young and old, are from as far away as Idaho and Minnesota. The father and son team of Sven and Ron Johnson are from Jewett City, Connecticut. The elder Johnson started competing in 1956 and is still going strong at age 50.
Just at a local fair at home, we kind of got interested in trying it and was fortunate enough to do pretty well in it, and we kept looking for bigger contests and traveling and going all the way to Australia to compete.
Sven's son Ron started competing at an early age himself.
I kind of grew up with it, and so naturally I wanted to try it out, and just kind of grew up with it and kind of liked it, so I always kept doing it, I guess.
Homelight Chainsaw Company sponsors the competition. Company representative George Fowler says the winner of today's competition will compete in September for a $10,000 World Championship prize.
The winner at this event today will get an all-expense-paid trip to go to Charlotte, North Carolina, kind of compete in the Lumberjack Super Bowl, which is the Homelight Tournament of Kings, and it draws people from all over the world to compete with chainsaws against each other.
So I think the sawdust gets in our veins or something like that. It's a challenge, and it's a good, clean sport. We've had a lot of fun with it, really. I think each year I should quit, but I still keep coming in once in a while, so I stay with it.
From the Alabama Forest Festival at Garrett Coliseum, Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
This is the Omni Sorter, an incredible piece of equipment that with lightning speed opens the bottoms of the return envelopes and at the same time sorts them into batches according to a special barcode printed on the envelopes and hopefully matching the type of return contained inside the envelopes. These people are called extractors. They're the next step along the line after the envelopes have been sorted. They open up and remove the contents and further sort the returns and the materials that are attached. The extractors work at Tingle tables, which were designed especially for this job by an IRS employee named Tingle. The returns go into one of 15 baskets according to the type of return and whether there's a payment attached. Then those envelopes are run back through a special machine to make sure that nothing's been left inside. That machine is so sensitive it can detect a tissue-thin piece of paper inside and kick it out to be retrieved. Then the returns go through 2 more points where they're checked for signatures and the necessary attached documents. This is the data conversion branch. This is the first time that the information that is contained on your income tax return is entered into the math verification computer at the IRS Center. It's that math verification computer which is linked to the National Computer Center in Martinsburg, West Virginia. The computers evaluate the information on your return. They give you certain values for the information you're reporting, either a plus or a minus value. And if your total values exceed certain limits, which, by the way, are known only to the computer and a handful of people who make up the formula each year, your name goes on a prioritized list, which later can be called for by district IRS offices who are auditing individuals and businesses in their area. There's also a chance that you'll be the victim of a random sampling of returns which are systematically audited. And by the way, just because you get your refund check, don't think you've escaped an audit. More than 90% of all audits occur after the returns are processed. And if all is not okay with your return, or if the IRS has any other questions or bookkeeping to do with your return, it winds up in this top-secret computer area. The IRS Center Director gave us special permission to go inside to show you the heart of this computer operation, which links the IRS offices in 5 states. And it has the capability of storing more than 4.25 trillion pieces of information on taxpayers. If all is okay, no problems with your math, and if you're within limits, your return is completed, your refund is ordered, or your payment is processed. The returns from individuals are kept here at the Service Center for only about 8 weeks. Then they're shipped to a federal document warehouse in East Point, Georgia, where they're kept for 6 years and then destroyed. But don't get the wrong idea. The bookkeeping information on the forms is permanently stored in the IRS computer in Washington. And by the way, if you're getting money back from the IRS, it doesn't come from this service center in Atlanta. It's mailed out on Fridays from the Treasury Department's Regional Dispersal Center in Birmingham. That's why most refund checks in our area arrive on Saturdays. And if you're expecting a refund, the IRS says to wait at least 10 weeks after filing before inquiring about your money. I'm Bob Howell, WSFA TV News at the Internal Revenue Service Center in Atlanta, Georgia.
Governor James' battle with the state legislature and the courts continued this week. The dispute centers around the 2 days off the governor took and gave his staff last week. Lawmakers supporting the current use bill say he did it to avoid receiving the bill. The governor says not so, that his taking the 2 days off didn't affect the bill. The current use bill is the hotly disputed measure dealing with rural property tax reductions. This week, the state Supreme Court said the governor can't close his office to avoid dealing with a bill. The governor came back and charged that the court shouldn't be making a ruling on the question because some legislators who asked the question control the justices' pay raises. The court ruled anyway. The governor now has asked for a judicial inquiry on the matter. And he's sending the current use bill back to the legislature with some amendments, one of which would limit the bill's effect to smaller, non-commercial rural property. The legislature, meanwhile, was still struggling with the education budget and the ongoing argument over whether teachers get a 14 or a 16% pay raise. A long, hot summer seemed to be taking shape this week for the Public Service Commission and Alabama Power. About midweek, after long talks, the PSC decided to end negotiations on a new rate-making plan and hear the company's rate hike request in the usual way. The week started with a shootout in Montgomery. City police said they shot 44-year-old Frank Robinson to death in an alley off Holcomb Street after he fired a rifle at them, injuring one officer. The shooting started after police went to Robinson's home to pick up another man, and a fight broke out. Selma police, meanwhile, are continuing their investigation into the murder of a 22-year-old Selma woman and her 5-year-old nephew. Deborah Ann Jones was found strangled. The youngster had been drowned. The boy's mother discovered the bodies. 4 people died Thursday when an Army helicopter crashed near Fort Rucker. The 4 Army officers were all from out of state. Officials say their UH-1 helicopter crashed near Skelly Airfield. An Army investigating team is trying to find out why. Some good news for Montgomery motorists this week. The multi-million-dollar overpass and interchange complex at the Eastern Bypass and Atlanta Highway finally opened. Everybody's still trying to get used to the new overpass, its on-ramps, off-ramps, and its service road arrangements. And, of course, a lot of you were mailing in your annual exercise in creative accounting to the government this week. Thursday night, Montgomery saw its annual midnight run at Capitol Plaza Shopping Center, as did similar mailing stations around the state, with many Alabamians beating the deadline for tax returns by minutes and, in some cases, by only seconds. Skip Haley, WSFA TV News.
We had the same experience last year, and I think that we can take a position now, and I feel rather comfortable that we will have a current use bill this year. I don't know of a better time for it to become a reality.
McMillan told the Congress to make itself heard, while the president of the Human Services Information Center in Washington, D.C., Jewel Sugarman, said, "If you ignore politics, politics will ignore you." And now it looks as if the Congress will be doing anything but ignoring politics. The Congress started almost 1 year ago in an attempt to bring together human service workers from around the state to form a united front to deal with, among other things, the budget cuts handed down from Washington. The presider of the group, Jack Gilboa, says since then the Congress has been growing, trying to define its goals and what routes it will follow to reach those goals. Now Gilboa says what the group is concerned about is education.
Well, I think what is needed is for legislators and for the general public to know what human service needs we have, to know what options there are for providing these services and what the benefits are. I think when legislators or anyone else slows down enough to really sit down and think about what's going on in our community and learn about it, I think their behavior basically will be different.
Gilboa admits human services have not been very popular politically in recent years, but he thinks that can be changed. He says human services touch a very large segment of the population, but many people take them for granted.
Were it not for human service providers that help families in stress, that work out social problems, that provide options, and so forth, our society would be much poorer.
Gilboa says he doesn't think this will mean a strong lobbying effort, but he suggests the Congress will work instead to quietly raise public awareness to the importance of human service programs, to try to convince people to rethink their ideas about human services. Gilboa is optimistic that it can be done, and says the Congress is preparing to be here a good long while. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News. It was a ceremony marked with music, celebration, and praise for the university and the new president. A host of visitors expressed their support and confidence in Randolph, the 8th president of the 108-year-old university. Randolph actually assumed office at the university October 2nd last year, following the retirement of Levi Watkins. But the afternoon of celebration was marked by warnings of a difficult future for the school. In the inaugural address, Dr. Samuel Proctor, an instructor from Rutgers University, said this is a very uncertain time for higher education, citing federal cutbacks to student assistant programs as one of the biggest problems. Proctor says those cutbacks will have to be met by university leaders with courage and creativity if ASU is to keep moving forward. But when Randolph officially received his office a few moments later, he made it clear he has no intention of letting ASU backslide. Randolph says our increasingly technical world has made knowledge the single most important resource in the nation.
Now, more than ever, we need the predominantly black institutions of this nation, committed, dedicated as always, with expertise, working with a particular population this country needs now more than ever.
Randolph calls it national suicide for the government to turn its back on higher education, and he says the U.S. must invest in the minds of all its people if it hopes to stay in the forefront of our world economy. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
Flames, Sam? Became aware of the fact.
Clouds broke up and the sun came out through.